You probably think 2,000 professional soldiers should have easily destroyed 400 Americans hiding inside a half-finished fort. That is exactly what the Hessians thought. They had the numbers, they had the training, they had the experience. But there was one thing they didn't know. The Americans had deliberately changed the fort into something that looked weaker than it really was. And when the Hessians finally broke through, they discovered they had walked straight into a trap. It was October 1777, and the British had just captured Philadelphia. General William Howe had brought a large portion of his army south from New York through the Chesapeake Bay. After defeating George Washington at Brandywine Creek on September 11th, British troops marched into Philadelphia on September 26th. The Continental Congress had already fled west to York, Pennsylvania. On paper, the American cause looked desperate, but Howe had a problem. Philadelphia sat on the Delaware River, and that river was the British Army's lifeline. Food, ammunition, equipment, and reinforcements could be moved upriver from the sea. But if the Americans kept the Delaware closed, the British occupation of Philadelphia could become a trap. The overland roads were slow and vulnerable. American raiders knew the countryside, and supply wagons could be ambushed. Howe needed the river open. Washington knew it. 2 American forts guarded the Delaware. Fort Mifflin stood on a muddy island on the Pennsylvania side. Fort Mercer stood at Red Bank on the New Jersey shore. Between them, the Americans had sunk rows of wooden obstacles called chevaux de frise into the riverbed. These underwater barriers were designed to tear into the hulls of enemy ships. American gunboats and Continental Navy vessels patrolled the channels. Together, the forts, artillery, ships, and underwater obstacles created a defensive system that prevented the British from easily using the river. Howe decided to destroy it. The Royal Navy would attack Fort Mifflin, while a large ground force crossed into New Jersey and stormed Fort Mercer. For the ground assault, Howe chose the Hessians. These German troops, particularly those from Hesse Castle, were among the most experienced soldiers serving with the British. Many had fought in the 7 Years' War and were trained in the rigid military traditions of Central Europe. The Americans feared them for good reason. At Long Island and White Plains, Hessian troops had demonstrated how dangerous, disciplined, professional infantry could be. Now nearly 2,000 of them were preparing to attack roughly 400 Americans. Their commander was Colonel Carl von Donop. Donop was a Hessian nobleman, an experienced officer, and an ambitious man with something to prove. Almost a year earlier, Washington had humiliated the Hessians at Trenton. On Christmas night in 1776, Washington crossed the Delaware and attacked Colonel Johann Rahl's Hessian brigade. Nearly 1,000 Hessians were killed, wounded, or captured. Donop had been nearby at Mount Holly, but he failed to reach Trenton in time to reinforce Rahl. One of his Jaeger officers, Johann Ewald, later claimed Donop had been distracted by a relationship with a local widow. Whether every detail was true or not, the consequences were real. Trenton became a humiliation, and Donop carried part of the blame. Now Howe had given him a chance to restore his reputation. Donop volunteered to lead the attack on Fort Mercer. He would take nearly 2,000 soldiers against fewer than 500 Americans. On paper, it looked easy, but the Americans had a commander who understood exactly what he was facing. Colonel Christopher Greene of Rhode Island had already experienced some of the worst fighting of the war. In 1775, he joined Benedict Arnold's expedition through the Maine wilderness toward Quebec. He endured the brutal march, participated in the failed assault on Quebec City, and was captured. He spent roughly 20 months as a British prisoner. While in captivity, he was promoted to colonel of the 1st Rhode Island Regiment. After his exchange in August 1777, Washington sent him to Fort Mercer. Greene arrived with the 1st Rhode Island and Colonel Israel Angel's 2nd Rhode Island Regiment, giving him a core force of about 400 men. But Fort Mercer itself was a problem. The earthwork stretched roughly 300 yards and was protected by a ditch, sharpened wooden obstacles, and artillery. It was too large for such a small garrison. If Greene spread his men around the perimeter, they would be dangerously thin. Then, a young French engineer named Thomas Antoine de Morduit du Plessis arrived. He saw the problem immediately. His solution was simple: make the fort smaller. Du Plessis ordered his men to construct a new interior wall across part of the fort. The northern section would effectively be abandoned. The southern section would become the real fortress. Now Greene could concentrate his 400 men behind a much smaller defensive perimeter. But the genius was what the Hessians would see. From outside, the abandoned section still looked like part of the fort. An attacking force would cross the ditch, fight through the abattis, and enter the supposedly defended position. They would think they had broken through. They hadn't. Behind the abandoned section stood a second wall, hidden from the attackers. And behind that wall were American soldiers with muskets and cannon. The empty section had become a trap. On October 21st, Donop's Hessian force crossed the Delaware and landed near Cooper's Ferry in New Jersey. They camped roughly 4 miles from Fort Mercer. Inside the fort, Greene knew they were coming. Local farmers had reported the Hessian movements. The Americans spent the night preparing. Before dawn on October 22nd, the Hessians broke camp. By late afternoon, nearly 2,000 soldiers had reached Red Bank. Donop divided them into 3 assault columns. Their mission was simple: break through, capture Fort Mercer, and open the Delaware. The Hessians carried fascines to fill the ditch, but they had failed to bring enough axes and saws to cut through the abattis. That mistake would soon matter. Around 4 in the afternoon, Donop sent an officer and drummer forward under a white flag. The message demanded surrender. If the Americans refused, they should expect no quarter. Greene's answer was equally blunt. The Americans would ask for no quarter and give none. Donop ordered the attack. The Hessian columns advanced across the open ground, while American artillery and 3 American warships hammered them from the river. The Hessians kept moving. One column under Lieutenant Colonel Ludwig von Minnigerode headed toward the northern face. 2 others, under Colonels von Mirbach and von Linsing, attacked from different directions. Minnigerode's men reached the outer defenses first. They fought through the abattis, and then they entered the fort. For a moment, it looked like they had won. The northern section was empty. Behind it stood the American defenders. At almost point-blank range, the Americans opened fire. Muskets erupted. Cannon loaded with grape shot tore through the tightly packed Hessian ranks. Men fell into the ditch. Then he was hit. Another charge was launched. It had turned a numerical disadvantage into a tactical advantage. But the battle was not over for Donop. The wounded Hessian commander was still alive in the ditch. Plessis found him and had him carried into the fort. Donop was eventually taken to a nearby house, being used as a field hospital, where American and Hessian wounded were treated together. The man who had demanded surrender was now completely dependent on the mercy of his enemies. According to accounts of his final days, Donop accepted his fate. When he realized Plessis was French, he reportedly spoke to him in French and expressed confidence that he was dying among honorable men. Donop died from his wounds on October 25, 1777, and was buried with military honors. But the British disaster on the Delaware was not finished. The next day, British warships attempted to force their way through the American river defenses. Among them was HMS Augusta, a powerful 64-gun ship of the line. The British hoped to destroy the chevaux de frise, suppress the American forts, and finally open the Delaware. Instead, the river became another trap. The narrow channels and shifting sandbars made navigation dangerous. Augusta and the smaller HMS Merlin ran aground. Unable to maneuver, they became targets for American artillery and gunboats. Then fire broke out aboard Augusta. The flames spread until they reached the powder magazine. The resulting explosion shook the Delaware Valley and killed more than 60 British sailors. Augusta was destroyed. The British had failed on both fronts. The Hessians had failed to capture Fort Mercer. The Royal Navy had failed to open the Delaware. And Philadelphia remained dependent on a vulnerable supply system. The British had captured the American capital, but they had not secured the river that made their victory sustainable. And that distinction mattered. With the Delaware blocked, every day increased the pressure on Howe's forces. The battle at Red Bank did not end the British occupation immediately, but it bought the Americans something they desperately needed: time. While Fort Mercer held, Fort Mifflin continued resisting on the opposite side of the river. British engineers and sailors had to fight for every yard of the waterway, while Washington's army remained in the field. The British had won a major prize, but the Americans had prevented that victory from becoming decisive. Fort Mercer was a reminder that in war, the side with fewer soldiers can still control the battle if it controls the ground, the timing, and the enemy's expectations. And on that October afternoon, Donop had all the soldiers he needed. He simply didn't understand the battlefield he was entering. 400 Americans had stopped nearly 2,000 professional soldiers. Not because they had more men, not because the Hessians suddenly forgot how to fight, and not because the fort was stronger than it looked. It was because the Americans understood something their attackers didn't. You don't always need to defend more ground. Sometimes you need to control where the enemy thinks he has already won. Plessis made the fort smaller. Greene concentrated his men, and Donop's soldiers were allowed to believe they had broken through. That belief became the trap. Carl von Donop came to Red Bank hoping to erase the humiliation of Trenton. Instead, he lost his command, his reputation, and eventually his life. And the little fort at Red Bank remained in American hands. The British had taken Philadelphia, but at Red Bank, 400 Americans had shown them that capturing a city was not the same as controlling it.